don't even agree on what an expert is. But the question is, whatever, if you got some people that are relatively accomplished, how did they get there? Are there things that, well, I know how I got there. I know how are there some things we could do to find out better guidance for future folks or for your own activities? And what can you do with it? So where I got started on this, when they're saying, well, what do you need to do for your PhD study? I'd read Gladwell's book, and he talks about the 10,000 hour rule. Well, that's interesting. I wonder where that came from. So I found a couple of sources, one being Erickson, Cramp, and Tesh Romer. They had done several studies, medical, music. The one that really caught my attention was they went over and looked at a whole group of violin students in Germany at a music school. And they divided up between the ones that are going off for potential solo careers, the ones that are, yeah, they're going to probably be in an orchestra somewhere, and the ones that are going to be music teachers. And just kind of because they're continuing with music. And they went, and you can see the three curves of how many cumulative hours they had put together by the time they were age 20. This was kind of good for me. I was interested because I do play the violin, or try. And in high school, my music teacher wanted me to go to Juilliard or Eastman. And I said, I don't think so. I think I'm not even competitive here in the Central Florida area, but I am competitive statewide in math and science and stuff. So I think I'm going down that path. But when I saw this, I said, well, yeah, but I didn't start at age 3 or 4. I started at age like 11. So I was just late on the curve. And kind of, a little warm, fuzzy feeling about that. But still, the question is, the difference between how much time people put in. Okay, gee, that's interesting, but how does that relate to the kinds of things that we're doing? So I went back to the sources behind the sources, and Bloom, who also is the author of Bloom's Taxonomy, the levels of knowledge and learning, did a study back in the 80s where he looked at 3 different areas of skill types. He looked at psychomotor athletic, which is tennis players and swimmers. And he could then go and say, well, they're people who win the championships or people who are tops in Olympics. So he could define that. People in aesthetics, and there he took sculptors and he took pianists, and he found people who won a piano contest in Moscow or something. So he was able to define the top. He had a little more trouble when it came to cognitive skills. He went to research mathematicians, not just plain old ordinary, but research folks. And he went to research neuroscience, neurologist. And that became a little more tricky because there isn't a contest on neurology research or a contest per se. But he went and saw who got grants and got recommendations from professors. He was also interested, and this will come up later, and kind of what Gundars was talking about next month. He said, well, how about this interpersonal relations stuff? How do we get, who are the top? And he said, there's no contest. I don't know how to find out. So he gave up on that one. So anyway, he took a look at, 20, 30 people in each group and came to some analysis of what it is, went through looked at their phases from early childhood to, public school type thing through going to college and then into their early careers. Which, by the way, becomes an issue for systems engineers because a lot of people don't start out systems engineering until they're off in a job somewhere. So you don't say, oh, I started systems engineering like those violinists at age 5 as a dedicated thought. You may have had some activities. So our 3 phases type analogy is a little different. But his key finding was, again, he said, it takes decades. So I said, well, gee, this is interesting, but what goes in those decades? Could I do something like Bloom's study and find out for some folks who've been through this path what happened? And is there some ideas we can bring forward that may be additional to what's going on today? I found this one study that Heidi Davitz had done, and she has both a questionnaire she did and then interviews on this topic of just systems thinking. And it was, how did you get systems thinking? And it was just limited to, what did you think the methods were? And kind of get between work experience, education, et cetera. And this was her ranking. Of course, she came up with, yeah, work experience was the number one. And then you have number three is, or excuse me, number four is life experiences outside work. So you've got, a couple of things that are experience-based, and then we have education. And she went to individual characteristics, which to me is more of a capability. That's another thing on systems engineers. So what makes a good systems engineer? Well, I'm not heading down that path at this point in time. And then she also said interpersonal skills as a means of getting systems thinking. That's interesting, but we'll go with that. And training is way down at the bottom. Says okay, but nothing particularly about systems engineering in the broader sense. Now, her thing with experience at the top, I have a daughter has been a director in human resources at Northrop Grumman, and now she's working with a construction company trying to get the construction industry into the modern, into the 20th century, frankly, much less the 21st. But she introduced me to the 70-20-10 module that is kind of standard in the human resources area, where they say 70% of development should be done through what they're learning at work on the job, 20% through coaching or mentoring, preferably structured, and then 10% of training. And if you start reading different descriptions, the definition of what's coaching or mentoring divvies, but again, high emphasis on both the work itself and corporate structure providing what you're doing in the way of a coaching program or a mentoring program, and organized training. So I said, okay. Well, first thing I had to do was go and say, let's make sure we know what we're talking about in the way of systems engineering, and went through and compared all the different resources, standards, handbooks, guide, processes, textbooks, college curricula. And there's a Helix study that's looking at hundreds, in fact, thousands of government systems engineers, and also looking at some stuff out of NCOSE, ESEP applications, and trying to define what systems engineers do. So I said, well, yeah, okay, they're all in pretty much agreement. You can argue the emphasis, you can argue the vocabulary. Are you a systems engineer or a system architect? Does a system architect work for a systems engineer, or does a systems engineer work for a system architect? And I go, I don't care. Basically, we're talking about the same kind of activities. Okay, well, how did we get there? Then there's competency models, which take a lot of the same material and start giving some scoring, and some of them a little more on what's the difference between a beginner and an expert. Okay, that's good. So I took this kind of stuff and said, well, if I'm going to do this, who should I talk to and find out in the Bloom type of interview, ask the question, how did you get where you are? And what did you do to learn what you know? So I came up with 3 definitions I thought were pretty good for what an expert or somebody pretty smart ought to be. An NCOSE fellow, because according to the NCOSE fellow recognition, you have to have done something significant and be recognized by your peers. Certainly, if you have an ESEP rating, I thought that ought to qualify for at least some level of expertise. One of the problems with that, though, is people say, well, do you have to have 20 years to be an expert? Well, you did to get an ESEP, but I'm not sure that it's mandatory. You had 20, 25 years to be an expert. But again, that's not my concern. I try to tell folks in academia, you try to challenge that one. That's neat. I'm more than willing to talk to somebody if we can find a way to define an expert with only 5 years experience. I'm happy to talk to them. But at least for starters, let's find out how these people got where they are. And then there were several folks that were corporate leads in a company. The lead systems engineer, or one of the top folks in the company, go around developing their processes, instructing their people, giving guidance on systems engineering. And when you take a look at the 24 folks that I talked to in this area that qualified, And as Gunnar mentioned, several are here in the audience today and are from this area, but around the country. One of the problems I do not have an international mix going on. So, I got to qualify. Maybe it's not true in Europe. However, personal experiences, that's not necessarily the case. So 17 were ESEPs out of the 24. 5 were in Cosi Fellows, et cetera. You can read the numbers. Lots of different types of places. Yes, large aerospace corporations. I tried to find people who were not. And I do ESEP certification reviews, and I get somebody going, well, I work for this, electrical company off some Midwest state. I'm thinking, oh boy, here's somebody I could try to get on my, and then I went to work for Lockheed Martin, Boeing, or whoever. So it ends up that, it was very difficult to find somebody who didn't at some time play in that arena. And then my committee would ask me about that. I said, well, it's kind of hard to find a world's best hockey player who didn't spend some time in the NHL. Yep. There might be some people in Saudi Arabia, they've got leagues and contests, that's pretty good. But let's face it, if you exclude anybody who's ever played in the NHL, you're probably making it hard to find. So that's kind of part of this. Fellows, top ESSEs, so, but large consulting and small consulting firms, academia, a few, quite a mix of different places folks have worked and in their histories. I also talked to 7 folks who were not, at least not at the time. A couple have since gotten an ESEP rating, from 5, from an ASEP rating all the way CSEPs and some preliminaries later to become ESEPs. In my total group across, 23 male, 8 female. I think I had back there, so I also talked to my neighbor who was a neurosurgeon, practitioner and researcher, who got out of practice and now is researching all that concussion syndromes and stuff out in California. And so I could kind of compare what I get relative to Bloom and what kind of responses. Also, I wanted to talk to the guy who started my daughter's company in civil architecture, but he says he's retired now. He doesn't want to talk about architecture. So I talked to her instead. She now owns the firm and got some inputs on a comparison against what's an architect does, because it's a lot like systems engineering if you're really a good architect. So, well, how did they learn? Well, no surprise, all 24 had experience, because you had to have experience in order to generate. Okay, big deal. But definitely that was a predominant learning discussion, things you pick up as you go along through hard knocks. Mentors, yes, but not necessarily a structured mentor program. Most of the discussion was by, yes, there was somebody I worked with, or somebody I respected, or a boss, or a coworker who was like a couple of years ahead of me, who really knew their stuff, and I kept my eye on what they were doing. Training, right? The thing that was kind of a surprise in a way at the time, but it's backed up by some of the applications as the Helix program for DoD started looking at the ESEP applications, is how many people actually learned by training, which I'll come back to with one extra chart. So I think that's something that we don't tend to think about. We think about training as how we can get somebody to teach the students, and not how you can get somebody to teach to improve their performance. Formal education, quite a few. Mostly not graduate degrees, but a lot of different graduate certificate programs and those kinds of things, but some degrees. The thing that really got me is the number of people who said, well, I went and grabbed the book, I got a CD, I went to a course on my own, found something else, some other self-directed source, not something structured, not going to a course that the company set up, not going for a degree, but when you need it, you have, and I resonated with that one, because I remember getting a job consulting with a firm building plating plants or designing plating plants for Department of Energy at Oak Ridge. What do I know about plating plants? To the library, plating plant books, So by the time you get there, you can talk plating plant. Anyway, so I found that very interesting, that that's one that we don't tend to think of as a formal source. And of course, networking, surprise, you'll see a lot of these folks around here. Yes?
With like our coding tutorial, does that come under like the Broadness Center? Is that more?
It's more like, yeah, people go and attend tutorials. That's another on that list. Things that weren't structured by the company for them, or that type of thing. So experience, discussed, of course, by everybody, and similar to the model. Couple of things. Very strongly, I kept finding that experience wasn't experience, and here's training. They were tied. I had the job, so they sent me to, or I got, or whatever, this course. Or I took this course, and then I got the job where I could apply it, and they were all impressed. So there's that tie between the two. And we tend to, like in the other part, oh, they're kind of separate and whatnot. Some people said, I see where years from now I'm going to need to know more about software. So they went and get a degree or courses and those types of things. And this, again, the self-learning of, I need this now, so I'm pulling in what I need today and signing up for that tutorial or whatever else. And I remember what I don't tell double E's, don't spread the word if you are one, is having my mechanical engineering degree and then getting some systems engineering training. I realized I was working a lot of electronic systems, so I went and took the DeVry TV repair course. Built my own oscilloscope and TV and stuff and studied. And then when I get to work, the stuff that people make electronics mistakes, I'm going, oh, even a TV repairman knows not to do that. Yeah. Because it teaches you the real world, not the stuff I had in college, which was the theory and the math under ideal circumstances. We had a design when they made it productionized to cheapen it out. The guy took away the thermal compensating resistors in an amplifier's chain. And when the sun came out and the box got warm, it didn't work anymore. Surprise, surprise. Again, that's kind of self-learning to find out what you need. We talk about depth and breadth in systems a lot. But what's breadth? Well, it's lots of stuff. So what I did was I started pulling out the types of things that people discussed as breadth. Most folks, because it's part of the NCOSE area, different systems engineering tasks like requirements and those types of things. Getting into management, products, customers, and stuff. I'm going to come back and hit each one of these a little bit heavier. But it reflects different things that people have gained experience on. And I think the average was something like 2.5, but different areas. Everybody didn't have all of them, but most everybody had some multiple of different kinds of things. So in the NCOSE areas, now I know that this wasn't complete because the ESEPs had to have at least 6 areas with 2 years each to turn in their application. And some of them only gave me 3 or 2 because I said, what are you, best at or most comfortable with? I think you're tops at. So they didn't obviously give the 4, 5, and 6. So this is kind of what they were talked about being good at. And you'll see a balance more than I expected in some ways between the front end requirements and the V&V and the systems integration, the back end. And then a lot of other stuff filled in, a lot of people in tool support, risk and opportunity management. As you might expect, probably if I drill deeper on specialty engineering, you'd probably find more involvement than not. But, well, what was your job? So we have, of course, everybody had been systems engineer at some time, but a very high level had been assigned teaching duties. Now notice this doesn't match with the people who said I learned by it. There was specific emphasis, but a lot of people have been assigned to those kinds of duties at some point in time. Test and evaluation as a specific thing, working, and people would separate that. I was off running tests, doing stuff in the field. A lot of involvement in program management. Somewhere along the line, program or projects and be the leader. some consulting, some people mentioned specifically software. And then there was a kind of mismatch of others, linguist, et cetera, some things that were one-offs. But I found that teaching being the second highest category of what they'd been assigned to do was an interesting number. So on life cycles in general, a lot of requirements work, a lot of testing work. We had comments about people saying when I was out in maintenance, it gave me a lot of understanding of what can go wrong. I did in a process program with a company once where what they did with a new hire was the first thing they did was they couldn't maybe get them out in the field, but they sat them down in a training course next to a customer and they had to go through and learn how to use the product and suffer through what the customer was suffering, trying to learn how to use this dumb stuff in the product. I say, okay, now that you've seen it, come back in and try to design the next one. One company and one person who was a lead in that company very strongly says in their organization, they do try to get the newbies into the lab and playing with stuff and working and testing and checking it out and living with the problems first before they ever give them an assignment and anything like requirements or design and so forth. That makes some sense. The various disciplines, of course, that's one you run into all the time. You start out as a mechanical, electrical, software person, or some people start off as a musician and then get somehow into systems. But eventually, you're going to be dealing with a lot of different specialties. As much as like mechanical, I had to learn some stuff out of in software and electrical and whatnot. You're going to run into those. Okay, not a surprise, but that's another common definition of breadth that we tend to recognize. Level, of course, you start off, and people would say, I started off designing one little product, and you move your way up. Some folks said that they had people they started with. They all started together as junior engineers designing electricals or building small software stuff. Never went beyond that, kind of stayed there being a specialist in some area of that design, but they would go from the board to the box to the chassis to the system to the development to the human interface and get to the whole system level. So that comes back to the what kind of person does it take to make the change. But that's yet another thing of breadth. So if somebody stays at one area, that's needs some other form of breadth to be able to do that. Products and customers. And if I started looking at all the different products people dealt with in their individual careers and then amongst the various experts, there's a wide range of different things that people work on. And a lot of you probably, the more experienced, have dealt on multiple of these already. I think when I slap this together, the only one I really haven't worked on is an elevator. But there's a lot of comparisons. And when you do that, you start seeing things and you see stuff repeated and you get the patterns down. And the first thing you do as a consultant, you walk into like the plating plant and we're different. And you smile and go, yes, you are. You have a different name on your product. That's about it. You're gonna have the same problems. But being able to see those kinds of things and make the translation is definitely of value. Harriet Mueller over in Europe gave a presentation on developing architects, and he gave his background of 3 different jobs, one in some medical area, one in plant lithography, and another one. And he said he learned in the first one about edge detection. And then it was a different kind of edge, but edge detection. And he was able to follow the same problems and from very dissimilar products, one to the other. And then you get smarter and, well, I learned this over there that we can use it here. People don't like to do that. So there's another product. And also the customers, because every different customers have different priorities. And you start to get a feel for what those are. And when you get to yet another new customer, you're more sensitive to the fact that they're not like everybody I've always dealt with before. and you're able to handle that. And that's one of the learning experiences from products and customers. So organization type, I mentioned large aerospace. A lot of people were military or government, and some were in the government, some were just working as support in the government program office as opposed to on contract away. But get a feel for those kinds of sides. Commercial large consulting versus small consulting academia. Different views of the problem and how it gets applied in different areas. So then there's management. This is where people find out about planning and budgeting and those kinds of things that maybe you didn't pick up in engineering school. And that was one of the things when I got stuck in my first job in configuration management, and I should have been insulted. But the thing that helped in that was having taken a course in contract law, so I could go talk to the legal people about our contracts and stuff. Having had a course in finances and economics, so you could talk to the budget people and be able to do that, translate into different languages. And so in the management area, you learn a lot of those kinds of things. If you're going to work up the food chain and be a lead engineer, you've got to be able to understand what the issues are on that side of the table. So having spent some time there is a good way to do that. Government and industry, I kind of covered that a little bit before, but there is a difference between being in a government contract situation or being from the government side where I spent a lot of time, or my more recent history is working as the contractor supporting it. One of the things that DSMC, Defense Systems Management College at Fort Belvoir, part of Defense Acquisition University, always gets pinged about is they have consistently reserved 10% of the seats in their classes for industry. And they're always getting somebody saying, we could use those 10% for more people in the government who need training. Hey, no, you don't understand. That's not just to give the industry people training. It's to get everybody in the same room at the same time. Because in the classes, the first part of the course is people pointing fingers. You idiots on your side. No, it's you doofuses on your side. And then, wait a minute. We realize that both sides have a legitimate view. And maybe we need to work this out. And you'd see that every class going on. Well, somehow or other, a lot of the folks that I interviewed have been through that on both sides to be able to understand the other side of the coin. And I think I probably should hit there on the industry side, the commercial versus aerospace is another one. One of the things that you learn in commercial, if you're in the commercial versus government contract, if you're in a government contract, you probably get a contract, you get paid for your development. If they don't buy it, they don't buy it. Maybe you lose some money, but you still get paid the millions of dollars you spent in most cases. In commercial, if they don't buy it, that's all money down the drain. So things like validation have a whole different viewpoint, early validation, making sure you really understand so you don't design another Edsel. And those kinds of things are differences in the way things get viewed between the sides. Okay, now, there weren't a lot of people in the interviews. In fact, they didn't even make my list of points I did when I pulled out the conversation thing about international. I started looking at it. I said, wait a minute. I've got at least one person who's talked about working out of the country. And I started looking at all these other people who've been involved in COSI or in international standards or international meetings and stuff. And I think that's another one, particularly in today's world, that we need to work on. And it's something we should include in our definition of breadth. Do you have a good feel for what goes on in other countries? And little things like when I was over in Germany and I get this request for, hey, I want your help over there as a foreign fields location in Europe. We want to come over and test this, I guess, some hundreds of megahertz little super duper new communications link. And we want to take it out and put it a couple of places in Germany and fire it up and see what happens. And I said, do you have frequency approval? Oh yeah, we have the FCC signing off saying, no, no, no. They had no clue that the Germans had their own approval rights for transmission frequencies. And this is like, they've almost finished the program and they want to do a field test and they haven't thought about this yet. So, these kinds of things, even stuff like how customs work when you go overseas, the different types of business practices, those can affect what you do and your design and your progress as a systems engineer, and you need to be aware of that. So back to kind of the list of ways you learn. We have mentors. I mentioned that a lot of times they're somebody who's senior, somebody that's out there and just watching it. I really find, I don't think I had anybody who actually stated it was a formal program. It may have been, but didn't come out that way. It was informal, not something going on. And this is different in the technical field than it is in the management field and other areas where it's very much part of the HR structure. If you're going to build somebody up the management chain, that you're looking for, particularly in more of the senior positions, to get mentors going in a structured area. So there were people saying, well, we got to do more on that. And if you don't, if you don't have a structured program, at least be sure you're thinking about, if I don't have somebody I can observe, how can I find someone? Another thing is we tend to think of mentors as the genius and the rookie. Probably another way is there ought to be levels. There ought to be things where you're helping somebody, that maybe you're not the genius, but you know more than this person, so you can help them along, and have somebody close by that you can assist. And that's another type of informal mentoring that we can all participate in some way and help ourselves as well as other people in the company, the organization. Structured learning, because we had lots of people went to training classes, right? Company provided. Sometimes you get them on their own. Some of these are, non-credit classes. Some of our webinars appear in this type of area, web sessions, other ways of getting some structured training going on. And then of course there's formal education, getting both degrees and graduate programs. This is one thing that has changed because most of the people I talked to, very few of them had degrees. A lot had other type of formal area. And you'll see here that in the study of the applications of ESEPs, that the one thing that has changed over time is a large increase in people who are actually getting degree programs and going for a master's of systems engineering or getting a systems engineering degree in the last the decade right after the turn of the millennium. Whereas you see the others are fairly stable for what went on. But that's one that is changing. So there's a lot more availability of formal training. However, formal training and degree programs are a help, but when you really need something and you need it now, that's when we don't have a lot of stuff out there. If you've looked at the Khan Academy, where you can go online and get 10-minute segments on math in different areas and take yourself through it. We have the bookcase, which gives you references. We don't have something in systems engineering where you can say, I need to do this in requirements, or I need something on interface requirements or integration of this type of stuff. Can I get some good, quick 10-minute blips on what I need to know to go do that? It's not there. And that's a real opportunity for the future in my mind. It's certainly something you need to keep in mind is when you get into a position where you need it now, where can you go? What's available? And can you be prepared ahead of time for those kinds of events? And can we help each other out? A lot of things we've used in COSI events are a line up here. A lot of things like tonight, just informal. You see a topic you like, boom, go find out about it. The other one I had was people talking about one person in particular who's I used to have a contest with on who writes the most papers, but said, Writing papers is how I learn. I get an idea, I have a thought. Writing the paper makes me structure it, research it, pull together my ideas and get them down. And then I understand it better than when I first had the idea. So that's another, not a structured method of developing your skills. And I invite you all, our symposium next year is going to be in Washington, D.C. So if you have an idea, even if you don't get it accepted, if you have something you're thinking about, start jotting down. And by November, have something to turn in and see what happens. And I guarantee it will help you learn a lot about the topic you're thinking about. Then we have the learn by teaching. Different things I learn every time I teach. That's one of my objectives. I teach a class and haven't learned something from the students, I'm not doing it right. Learn as much by teaching as they did in graduate classes. There's one paper that I've got in the backs of slides that he was terribly interested. There's a gentleman in Italy, Cortese, who did a study of banking managers and found that with them, all of them said the thing they really learned from was teaching their employees. And he has a list of things, ways to learn by teaching. Learn by observing what you do right and wrong. I'll learn by observing what the students do right and wrong. Learn by the students giving you feedback on what you did right and wrong. Ability to experiment with new ideas as you're teaching and try out different methods. So he's got a nice list of things you can do as a teacher to develop better. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think the way that most organizations tend to work it is, let me find the best person who has the knowledge to give it to the people who don't. And it's a diode function. I'd seriously invite us all to think about it as bidirectional. We should be thinking about, okay, who has some information, but also is a person that can learn some stuff by getting them out in front and dealing with the various stuff, feedback that students give you. I'm glad that we have this focus next month on interpersonal skills, because universally people said you've got to have them if you're going to be a systems engineer at anything more than somebody who's off in the corner playing with doors and entering requirements. And even then, you're probably in trouble if you don't. So one of the phrases that I ran into was, engineers get hired for technical skills, promoted for management skills, and fired for lack of interpersonal skills. And the other thing I found is, maybe if you're one of the interviewees and I missed you and there was something else, let me know before I get in trouble for it. But the only time that people said they had training in interpersonal skills was if they went into management, like it's provided, or there are some of us who are in the military where you get leadership training at least, and some communications training and those kinds of things. But if in the engineering track, it just doesn't seem to be part of the thought process. Why would engineers, they're hopeless, they don't talk to other people anyway, that's just, well, no, you can't do that. As we get more complex systems and more emphasis on teams, the availability of positions for people who can just sit in the corner and work, it's reducing. So we need to work on that. Okay. So in summary, what would my suggestions be as takeaways from this? Well, first off is to take a look at these different types of areas of experience that people had. We had 2 or 3 different ones. Everybody didn't have the same group. But in most companies, the program for breadth is to go around the different divisions and learn the company. Well, that's good. But there's some other things that we can add to the definition of breadth, and other things that reflect some knowledge and expertise that systems engineers at the top of the food chain really need. And we should be thinking about that definition of breadth. And maybe, this is one study. This isn't the kind of study that proves that this is it. So it's open. And it says, here's a theory that this is one definition of breadth. Can we add to it? But at least can we think about that as we develop systems engineers and start asking, do you have the opportunity to? How can you get these kinds? I just read in the Washington Post earlier this week that companies are tending to drop the kinds of programs that even send people around the companies for cost reasons. Whoa, that may work for some things, but for systems engineering, that's not a good sign. So we need to do those kinds of things. Find your mentors or be a mentor, and don't wait for the program to be formal. As education and formal training is available, absolutely, go for it. Particularly those of us who are in the academia part, come to us and spend your money with us. We'll be more than glad to set it up. But you should also look at these self-directed aspects and think about the structure and how that works. And can you be of assistance to people to help point them when they have needs into where to go, so you don't have to be just the mentor teaching. Where else can they go to point them on the knowledge base? Seek opportunities to teach. Seek opportunities to get people to teach. And then, of course, the last one is come next month and talk about interpersonal skills. And with that, I will open it for some questions.
We'd like to get you to use a microphone for when you ask a question. Please raise your hand and we'll send the microphones around.
Hi, Jim. I guess more of a comment, and I've said this to chapter. I thought and tell me, I think your presentation backs this up. I always thought, like in a meeting like this, it'd be a great idea that if we have like 3 or 4 10-minute topics, that people would stand up and give a very practical, here's how I did something on a job for this topic or for this thing in 10 minutes. And that goes along with what you said, these kind of 10-minute blogs. You could videotape it, you could put it on YouTube, whatever, people can search, that kind of stuff. That way you get people teaching and get people sharing their expertise that people can use and understand in these little sound bites of stuff. And I think that'd be something we could do as a chapter and would go right along with what your presentation talks about. I
agree. That would be very much in concert with some of the things that I've been looking for, and this came out of, yes.
Have you heard of other groups doing that in COSI or chapters?
No, at Stevens, we had an objective when Dinesh organized about 8 years ago. He said, I'd love to have just 10-minute little blocks that you could click on our website and find the expert on this, and like it hasn't happened. But there's all kinds of reasons. I don't know if academia is ever going to do that, but I think chapters could do that.
Well, one of the interesting things is if you go search YouTube, you can find somebody talking about something, anything that you want to ask. Now the question is whether the answers are reasonable or not.
Do they know what
figure
they're
out that yourself? So it's really really hard to decide.
Question up here or comment?
Thank you. Other than the difference in perspective on validation, did you notice any other differences between systems engineers that had done a significant amount of work for a marketplace where they couldn't directly talk to the millions of people they would serve with the system versus systems engineers that may have had a government POC or a contract that said, thou shalt do this?
Yeah, there is a difference. Well, there's 2 things. One, I've actually found more people in commercial who can talk to the customers than in the DoD. I get a lot who aren't allowed to because somebody's controlling. But one of the big differences is that meet the spec mentality versus build a product that's useful and will sell. And that is, not that I don't find that in some people that work for the government under contracts, but I get a lot of, when I was doing process improvement, I get a lot of things where I say, can I see your validation process? and they would say, "Whoa, validation, that's OT&E, and we don't play in that." You know, you have no interest in whether or not it's going to pass or any risk there. There's nothing you do to mitigate. Whereas in the commercial side, it's the opposite. So there is a difference on whether or not, but even in the government side, sometimes I see people who can't talk because of security. You know, I'm not allowed to tell you what I'm doing. And that's when somebody told me they got an electronic box one time with nice air cooling, only somebody wasn't allowed to tell them it was going in a satellite. And
Did you hear anything relative to requirements and verification? Because in commercial products, you could be sued, have a lawsuit, you had some liability for it?
didn't hear that in discussions. I have run into that, and you know, that whole bit about, and not that you can't. Sometimes people have been sued in the government contracts too, when airplanes crashes and pilots, the defendants come after them, and so it can happen. But it's not like the legal. And I defer to Zane on some of the details on that type of legality. But yeah, I have run into that in my discussions of meeting requirements and those kinds of things in the systems training I've done. Any other? Okay. Shall we raffle?
So a drawing for the book. And the book is System Engineering and Analysis,